There's all the people. Good morning, all. Thanks for your time. For those who don't know us already, and hi to those who do, there's myself, Rob Turner, Darius and Sally, and we're part of Customer Science Management Consulting. Just very briefly, we've been around for ages, doing all sorts of things. We've been doing strategies, program reviews, business cases, data management, and increasingly privacy for many years. We've got the scars to show for that, the visible and the not visible ones. And we feel we have a pretty good understanding of the environment, business, and our clients. And one of the things we like to do for our clients is bring in the lessons learned. We find so many people end up tripping over the same things again and again, and it's basically just not necessary. So we'd like to make sure we can do that, hence today. That's where all this came from, right? So obviously I've got a slide deck because we do. Consultants do that. Privacy, rapidly growing area of concern for businesses and individuals, which is quite an interesting aspect of all this. So for the next 40 minutes or ish, we're going to go through this. Darius and I will be doing most of this. We've got a fairly conversational sort of way of going about it. We do recognize the content is restricted. We could spend hours going over this. We could write books on it. We don't want to do that at the moment. So if there's anything, please, we're always open for conversations on this, and we can chat about other stuff further. So without further ado, we'll go share and we'll look at this. We'll make sure that everyone comes back so I can see them. This is the title we've chosen. Okay. What we're looking at here is privacy incidents. And a lot of this, one of the key things we're going to be talking about in a lot of this is the language that happens. And we talk here about leadership and what they ask. And invariably, we've found it's not that well defined, a lot of this. People ask, do we know what the risk was? Who owned it? What were the controls? Did we have visibility? These aren't necessarily privacy issues. They're governance, accountability, risk management. Whether the privacy is buried in there and how it's buried in there is the thing. How we do that, the people who are here, I would imagine it's partly your role to do this sort of stuff. So let's go through a few of these. Why this matters now. It's quite interesting. The privacy environment, the legislation is increasing. We have lovely things like GDPR, and I'll assume lots of knowledge for this. So the EU privacy legislation, which is increasingly being active, more so on very large players. And we could have a whole session on that if we want. But the onus on business is rising. Countering to that, the privacy awareness is growing, not just with the businesses, but with individuals. So your clients, members of the public, they're much more aware of it. There's also...
Yeah, Rob, and I'd say that you can see the community attitude survey. So that's an OAIC survey. So that's our Commonwealth regulator. So these are the surveyed cohort was Australian individuals, right? So I think we've moved on from the conversations of 5-10 years ago, which is no one really understands privacy, and it's something that lawyers do and lawyers tick off, and it's with legal at the moment. So I think we've moved someone onto that, but that's resulted in, as privacy sort of has sort of settled into organizations, you have customers and clients, employees even are being more aware of their privacy rights and have that expectation. And I think what's interesting here is the little graphic which we've taken from that survey, which is that so if privacy is an issue, who's responsible for it? And 98% of people saying it is organizations that have to minimize privacy risk. So there is that expectation that is now becoming more and more settled in people's mind, and it's an operational expectation, right? It's not organizations are legally exempt from certain things or have, settled things legally, but function in a way that's privacy positive.
Yeah. And those surveys they've been doing for like 25 odd years. So there's been
Yeah.
massive change across it. It's again a good thing to reflect on. And the little quick one there, as Darius said, this is people's attitudes. Some of this makes all the mitigating decisions or the decisions on what to mitigate, when, how much to spend, it makes it harder because there's more people who are informed, who are coming from different angles about all this sort of stuff. And in that sort of environment, as we say there, at the same time, AI, sorry, have to put it in. I think we've kept it to an absolute minimum though. AI as an example, adoption is accelerating, data sharing is increasing, business interests in data are growing, whether that's nice interests, good interests, or whatever. And ecosystems are just becoming more and more connected naturally, but the counter to that is the privacy stuff.
Yeah, and there's it connected within organizations and also between organizations. If you're using a third-party login or identifier system, if you're saying, okay, Google can now log into our portal, great, provides a great benefit to the customer. But we have to think about how privacy works within that relationship.
Yeah, and that's the thing, the but.
Yeah.
For some of those things, here's again brief rundown on some of the areas where how privacy risk builds and the language that's used in discussion. So you can have the compliance mindset, technical language, and other aspects where the visibility of privacy isn't necessarily that obvious. So the classic with the compliance stuff, we find this all the time, literally. We have our policies, we've completed training, legal have signed it off. Privacy used to be purely a thing for a realm for legal. At least that's changed. The classic for me is these things like, we've already completed that project. Oh, but I've already spent the money on that. It's not in this year's budget. Those sorts of lovely things.
Yeah. And the technical language, I think, is a really important one because it sort of splits privacy off from our usual conversations about sort of audit and risk mitigation and risk management. And I don't know, I've never heard an executive person saying, in the event of a privacy breach, quickly check that we are compliant with APP principle 4, that it's not the way that they think and talk about these things. We might understand them as privacy stakeholders and we might understand why they're important. But if we don't communicate them to executives who are the ones responsible for privacy at the end of the day, in a sort of best practice operational arrangement, we don't get anywhere. We have to talk the language of risk, reputational risk. Its impact is going to impact our finances. This is the potential, reputational or damage with our customers that a breach might result in. That gets the right people listening and in tuned into the right conversations.
And it doesn't, we talk about the executives or the business itself, but it sort of expands past that too, because we've got all our vendors, we've got legal, we've got what's in contracts, the client themselves, what's the language that's being used, and how do we make it so that it's consistently understood where this comes from, or that we, as privacy-ish people, can do all this sort of stuff. And that's where some of this stuff up at this on the side there, this visibility. So again, in practice, we find that a lot of these things, privacy is almost hidden in them. It doesn't mean it's not looked at, but it's a bit more covert than overt, I suppose. So, operational decisions, the classic projects, et cetera, system changes, all of these things can have massive effects on privacy. And usually the longer you leave it, the worse potentially is the effect. New technologies, we didn't mention AI, so. Acquisitions and organizational change is another one we find is really significant, because when people go and do due diligence, the whole aspect of privacy and the privacy risks, or what the current level of privacy management and understanding, escalation, governance is in one organization, usually that's not very well looked at when you start looking at mergers, acquisitions. The same with the executives. Usually they'll have different levels of risk perception and wanting something, pick
Mm.
AI again. And one of our pet favorites is enthusiastic individuals. These days you can go out and buy access to some fantastic tools just for the price of a corporate credit card. And some of these individuals inside organizations will. And they've got the best intentions by far, but what they do isn't good. And it puts the risk through the roof. But
Mm.
that's not their priority. Their priority is to do their job, gain the corporate advantage, the market advantage, et cetera, et cetera. And it can be hard to rein in. Again, using the right language can help with that, because then the execs will see the risk, or you can get policies and practices in place that can counter some of that. I keep doing this so I can look at the time. Thank you. Okay, Darius, you want to have a quick chat on that, and then we'll go to the next ones?
Yeah, so we've identified 6 hotspots, which really is a sort of systematic way that we can look at the different areas of risks and understand actually what are the questions that we should ask ourselves to be able to unearth specifically what needs to be visible in terms of visible to the wider organization, so we can manage privacy more practically and sort of be more confident about our ability to deal with exposures and breaches. So we've got incident readiness. Are we properly prepared for a breach? Those shadow systems, what's existing on paper or even off paper about where personal information might be held. Legacy data, always a big one, has always been a big one from the days of did people lock the filing cabinet? The third parties is becoming more, third parties is sort of maybe even a disappearing term as we get more and more integrated with cloud vendors and partnerships and acquisitions and that sort of thing. Data ownership is a big one that we see, in that there's data out there which has no clear owners. So there's no one sort of, advocating for it, being able to be empowered to make decisions around it. And the ever-present emerging technology, are we keeping up with what technology is doing with our personal information that we hold?
And just digging a little bit deeper into some of them. So for each of them, we've got some dot points, a typical sort of risk question. And down underneath, we've got some examples of some of the things we've come across. Legacy data, the classic for a lot of this stuff is we'll get the new shiny system, we'll migrate all the data across, and then the old data we'll keep just in case. Where is it? Who knows? Who's got access to it? Who knows? Is it part of backups? Maybe. What's happened to the old backups? All those sorts of things. The other thing that we've stuck in there under legacy data is the obligatory email, which is the bane of so many people's existence when it comes to this sort of stuff. If people will go and look at all the retired applications, you might have a project that does all the right things by all this sort of stuff. Meanwhile, the email is sitting there, someone's backed up their email wherever, or it's backed up in general, and it has all sorts of stuff in it. It is a very, very hard place to maintain privacy policies, approaches, regulations. The classic, what happened to the old data?
It's effectively
being IT-ish, yeah. I go back to the days when of course we keep it. We keep it just in case.
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. And the email and stuff is, we always talk about structured versus unstructured data. Emails are the classic for unstructured data. It can be anything, in text, in images, in attachments. You have to be careful about it. And there's all sorts of tricky situations with former employees, former clients, etc. It can be a real doozy. But it often starts with just asking the questions, what happened to that old data? Do we need to hang on to it? That sort of thing.
Yeah. And that goes back to the classic thing that we'll mention again, to the standards and guidelines that you apply. There's nothing better than having Australian standards to sort of reference back on and say, oh yes, we base our things on the Australian privacy principles. So some of those sorts of things then have a better language to executives and to contractuals, to legals, all that sort of stuff as well. So you can get there and say the purpose of the data. What was the purpose of gathering that data? That purpose is now fulfilled, deleted. People
to minimize risk.
generally don't like doing that, sort of understandably, and that mindset is a bit hard to get, but once you've done it, and the risk is just drops immensely, and it's such a nice, almost feeling to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Then we have third parties, as Darius said, call it what you like, partners, third parties, etc., etc. Outsourcing, the contracts you have, and also the mergers, acquisitions, and the way that some of these work, like Microsoft and the Microsoft, Google, etc., who have such a massive presence and who have their own management of environments that link to our business. You know, there's so many examples of people being breached by through third parties and through poor, call it poor password management or poor whatever, but it's still a breach. But then also, as we say, down inside here, you've got third parties. Now that could be marketing, right? So third parties doesn't necessarily mean that it's a marketing platform. It could be your own marketing. We find marketing love to keep data on the customers. But then they go and keep things like the partner's name, the children's name, the birthdays, you know, stuff that we just go, oh my goodness, no. And invariably it's an Excel spreadsheet somewhere. So
yeah, and this gets to the shadow systems point as well. Do we know where every piece of personal information is? We may know in our main systems, but all that, proof of concept that certain team did, those tracker spreadsheets that, people keep on maybe even their local desktops, that sort of thing. The marketing example is really good, Rob, because I think we've had a client who, was pretty good with privacy hygiene, but then marketing and sales were going off to expos and to events, gathering information from people on the floor, writing it into the spreadsheet on the iPad, and it was first name, last name, address, where can I contact you? It was, notes that they may have picked up on or made during that interaction about people, where they'd worked previously, all this sort of stuff. Now, that is collection of personal information, and there may be a purpose behind it, sure, but it needs to come within your formalized privacy governance, because that's the sort of stuff that can slip. It can be left on a train or whatever else. So you got to be across some of these areas of risk which aren't obvious and can't be satisfied by just reviews of your primary systems.
And that's really hard because it's not like we're going to go and scour our entire systems and find everything. And that's where that whole language aspect again comes back, where if we can get to the executives or put a policy in place or something that is understandable and makes sense to the likes of marketing, that's good. And I don't care. I go and talk to them and just say, did you know, does this make sense? I'll change the words for you. Don't care, whatever works. But yeah, what systems are operating outside formal governance? It can be a lot. Continuing on with that sort of the hotspots things, one of my pet favorites is the data ownership.
Yeah.
In theory, someone should own the data that your business has, and it might be all very good and proper to say, yeah, at this high level, okay, yes, here's the owners and here's whatever. But a lot of that is sort of almost lip service to compliance that we mentioned up before, where it's tick, tick, tick. Yes, we have an owner for the such and such. But do they know where their data is? Do they know what's happening to it? It's changing them over time. Even when we're talking about systems and new systems, invariably as you get new systems, they include additional fields. What's the new data we've included? What's the old data? when we did mitigation, when we did migration, how did we migrate that data? Did we bring it all across? Did we change any of it, etc.? And then this data sharing is absolutely enormous, I think. As we've got down the bottom, client information shared with a partner. Who actually owns the data and who owns which bits? And if something happens, who's accountable for looking after it? Who is there to try and make sure that it is up to date, that the person whose personal information that is can actually access it? Again, going back to the privacy principles. They're not supposed to be hard questions. And I think that's the big thing. You can make it seem as hard as you like, but that's not what we want to do. We want to make it try and seem simple and easy.
It's practically who is the person who can make the decision, a risk-based decision around that data. No, we're not going to collect this anymore. Yes, we're going to collect it, and I can justify the reason why. And that person has to be confident. And when you have things like a change or someone bringing in a system or a data sharing agreement, it may appear like an IT problem because it's IT syncing up fields and doing migrations, but practically it's not. It's a business problem. Someone has to say, no, that should not be visible, or yes, I'm happy for that to be visible, or in the event of a breach, we still own this data, that sort of thing. Because if your answer to who specifically owns the data and who owns the risk is someone in IT, probably in privacy governance isn't up to scratch because they can make technical decisions, but they really, unless it's a very, specific example or smaller organization, they probably don't understand the data and how it's used within the business and the value of it enough to be able to answer the questions and to sort of be the one who's around the table in the event of an incident or a breach or even just regular risk management activities.
Yeah. It's interesting because when data security and everything came up years ago, it was IT, and IT sort of took it. It's almost like IT learned a bit. Privacy came up and everyone went, well, no, I don't really understand that. And it, as we said before, it more sat with legal for a long time. It varies around in a sort of bit of a grey area and just quite ill-defined in a lot of places. Someone might have it in their position description, but what actually occurs after that, and then where is the individuals who are accountable further, is not quite as easy. So yeah, emerging tech. We won't use AI as an example because we're sick of it. But managing the priorities. What are the priorities of the organization? What are the priorities of the emerging tech? Which ones are we going to go gangbusters for and therefore have more risk? The classic, one of my favorites at the moment is facial recognition. Bunnings, hey, where else do you go on a Saturday? When you go in there and they have facial recognition, their implementation of facial recognition, they put it in. The Office of the Australian Information Commissioner took them to court, literally, and won, saying it was illegal. Bunnings came back and appealed that and won the appeal. Sure, personally, that's a bit of a high-end game for risk mitigation, I think, but they got something through. Yeah, don't know what it cost them in the end, but a bit. Then again, too, if you get right into it, some of the things that came out of that judgment were really interesting because the facial recognition, Bunnings argued that it only went to RAM of the system for milliseconds. And the judgment was, no, I'm sorry, that is still stored personal data. You have collected it. Therefore, all the privacy principles apply. So having some of those sorts of things is nice to be able to sort of expand on the stuff if you do talk to execs or we are writing a paper for something. Data scrape, privacy by design, really big. Again, really best practice and mature. And it's something to grab onto, again, like those, we talk about what the Australian standards are, the guidelines that the information commissioners have come up with. There's all sorts of things. Privacy by design is another really good one. Personally, I think the best thing with it is, again, it's not hard, but do it early. We'll talk about privacy impact assessments and when they're done. Usually they're done too late. They're done just before a project goes live. And the privacy impact assessment we know, we've had some, where it comes up and says, I'm sorry, you're breaching privacy practices. You shouldn't be putting this in. Whereas right up at the beginning, when you're looking at options, you can do a privacy impact assessment. It can have a lot more impact, a lot less cost, much more directional. Incidents, data breaches, mandatory notification of data
Before
breaches.
you go on, Rob, can I say something about automated decision making?
Yeah, of course. Oh, yep. Go, mate.
A great one. If we are automating things more than ever now with robotic automation, other automation, it's really increased productivity. It is sometimes a really good solution, or it's often a really good solution. But if we want to know where the focus of privacy regulators is going to be, we can look to the more mature jurisdictions. And for the European Union and GDPR, the use of personal information in automated decision making is absolutely a key focus. So we're not talking about regular steps. We're talking about decision making, things that would have been decisions by humans now being automated. That can be through AI, that can be through actually some other means. But if there's personal information involved in that, I think it is something that organizations should be very aware of, that it is probably going to be a focus for regulation in the future, that essentially regulators around the world are not comfortable with the idea of personal information being used to make decisions about client accounts, the services they receive, whatever it may be, without human intervention.
Yeah. And just as a sort of bit of an aside, one of the things we do a lot with the regulators, the privacy regulators, they're one of our clients. We obviously keep walls up and everything on that, but it gives us a good idea of what the focus is on some of these sorts of things, what they're doing. And it's a lot of the time, actually, with some of our government clients, we've actually gone to the regulators and said, here's what we reckon. The regulators themselves are conservative that's fine. They can give us a decision. They can give us something that is a really good basis for going forward. It's pretty hard for them to come back on us after that sort of thing. But yeah, the whole sort of stuff like robo-debt, et cetera, there's some examples of this where it just goes so wrong.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can make it work. This is the message, right? Yeah. We want to make, it's not stopping things because of privacy. It is knowing how to do them with making risk-based decisions, being confident about those decisions. Okay, we have very clear information for our customers about how their data is being used. We have a consent module in place if needed. These sorts of things that we can put in place. Again, privacy by design, proactively to make sure that we're actually confident about what we're doing. It's not about not doing it because we're antsy.
Yeah, and it produces quite a good output usually because we end up with something that is reviewable. So you can go to the executives, and if executive leadership changes over time, which it always does, or there's that individual who's actually got a bee in their bonnet about something and wants to go and argue something that they've Googled or, that ChatGPT's come up with or whatever it might be, fine, here's the stance. And it is really solid.
Yeah, and that's why we put our regulator engagement there and incident readiness. We shouldn't be afraid of regulators or even proactively going to regulators and seeking advice. It's a good practice. It makes you look good. Obviously, it's not, you wouldn't use it all the time. But the point is that it shouldn't be a scary sort of Damocles hanging over you. It should be something that you go, yeah, we're confident that we have the right, evidence in place that we've made a correct, confident decision.
Yeah, because they're under the pump as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where we get to some of these things like incident readiness. Now, notifiable data breaches is one of them, and there's a fair bit that's documented about that and how to approach it, et cetera, et cetera. So that's good. In the end, though, it is still going to be an internal decision on if it is a breach that will potentially cause significant harm. So part of the internal policies have to have all that sort of thing. And we find a lot of places where they go, yep, we've got this, again, compliance, tick, tick, tick. They've got the processes, they've got the roles. But then if you go and talk to the guy who's supposed to say, oh, yes, I agree, go and we do have to notify the regulator, or do have to start looking at how we notify our clients whose data's been breached. That person's changed, the role's been split, who knows, or they're on leave, or all sorts of things. Time critical decision making. There's nothing worse than going through all this sort of stuff. It's like saying, okay, who's going to say we're going to pull the pin on the network type thing? It has to be someone. And usually these days, thankfully, there's enough people who are going to say, yeah, I will make that decision. Good on you. Thank you very much. I'll write your name down. Yeah. And going through some of the scenarios of that sort of stuff, it's always nice to do a bit of almost a role play type thing that doesn't just involve the ones who are already on board with it, like IT. Involve some of the others, ask the execs to do something. It won't take that long. What else have we got there? Facial recognitions. Yeah, data sharing, data. Yep. This slide is yellow, so it must be highlighting. The hidden problem.
It's highlighting a very good point, which
is that what it was?
You think, yes, you think you can be monitoring this stuff, but you actually aren't. So we see a lot of privacy metrics. Sometimes these are sort of out of the box things that you can monitor. Sometimes they're the information you have on hand that is sort of semi-related to privacy. Number of incident breaches, you may have this number, you may have some, exec reporting requirements around this sort of stuff. But we see generic metrics. We see dashboard overload is a good one. It looks very pretty, but you don't get any message across. Who actually owns these numbers, and who can explain whether it's good if they go up and down, and by how much? What exactly execs need to know, or an organization really needs to know, is what is our exposure levels? Is it increasing? When do we have to, move into a different stage of mitigations because things aren't working? Or are we doing improving? Are we, can we sell privacy as a strength within our organization? Are we measuring risk, or are we just measuring activity? And what standards or guidelines are we basing privacy management on? Are they ones that we feel match our organization, match what we're trying to do, are best practice? Have we looked at them recently? Have we reviewed them? Forrester, I think that's a really useful quote. From Forrester, nearly 75% of enterprises experience one critical risk in the past year. So it's pretty common to have a critical risk event. And in many cases, leadership had metrics in place, just not the right ones. Do we know, are we just collecting and showing what we think is easy to collect and show? Or is it meaningful? Is it communicating?
Yep. Well, as you say, Darius, is our exposure increasing? Are we just boiling the frog, so to speak, so that it is slowly increasing? We've seen a lot of dashboards where they go into their monthly whatever meeting and the indicators are red, and they go through and go, yeah, it hasn't changed, and it's whatever. And you go, hold on, red? What's that? Oh yeah, no, because it's been red and we understand. And yeah, okay, red's supposed to mean something. It's not just, oh, let's just change the colors. And so yeah, very interesting. The other thing with the standards and guidelines too, there's a whole range of things you can do where you can do assessments of your privacy maturity, or your privacy management maturity. And again, some of the regulators have some of these. We know that for a fact, don't we, Darius? And they are quite good because it gives some relativity to it, and it also shows what some of the what the regulators and the industry itself perceives as some of the more important areas of focus that you should be having in there. Yeah, again, visibility. It links back to those other slides that we had before. visibility, talking about it, reporting and understanding it. Running a privacy risk review. We get brought in to do a lot of these. A lot of the time they say, oh, we need you to come in and do this because we're about to be audited, or we need to do this because it's been 2 years since we did something, and we keep on saying, well, okay, that's not potentially not the right timing to bring us in. What's the risk? If the risk is the same, there's nothing better than being able to say to execs or to someone else, we don't have to do anything about this now. Oh, they love that because they're used to people screaming at them about everything else. So privacy reviews, now that includes privacy impact assessments. The reasoning, the triggers for privacy impact assessments, again, is fairly well defined because they're a fairly well-known tool. I'd suggest be a little bit careful if you're doing impact assessments that you don't go too legal with them, because the legal guys who do them tend to be a bit conservative and will literally just give you sort of a tick, just saying, yes, it strictly complies with the legislation or not, rather than giving ideas or information or privacy positive points that can come out of a thing. So triggers. I would
also say, Rob, that I think that the trick with PIAs is that they're not a strategic privacy risk review. So privacy risk reviews is a sort of umbrella term. PIAs are a component of that, but they're really specific. The subject of a PIA is a change, a system change, sometimes a process change, but you're looking at the impact of that change on personal information. That it doesn't, by design, go into deeper governance issues within the organization, which may be the subject of what you want to do, or a broader system privacy review, which may be the subject of your privacy risk review that you want to do. So APIA is a specifically really tightly defined reflection of compliance against the Australian privacy principles, or if you're in government, whatever your state and territory legislation requires. But they are not, they are by design very tight, and they don't look into some of those things. So at the top right there, we've got a practical review should answer the following questions. Where is exposure building? Well, if your scope isn't large enough, you won't be able to identify that. So consider what sort of review you need to do. Consider whether it's worth doing it internal, whether it's worth going external, those types of things, because you don't want to sort of have a blind spot again to privacy risk just because you haven't implemented the right review mechanism.
Yeah, and it sounds a bit silly, but what we find a lot of the time is internal. As soon as you go internal, it gets stuck in the usual politics, and they come back going, oh yeah, but so and so did that, and you know what barrow they're pushing. Again, the same with approaching the regulator, the same with having well-defined standards that you're following, etc. PIAs are usually done independent by an independent organisation. And the same thing what we're saying here with this, like a formal-ish risk review, which looks at all of it, because there's so much to it. And different people across the organisation will have different viewpoints that need to be validly answered. And most of the time they can, and it will just make the whole, it makes the risk profile so much more normalized too. So yeah, is risk increasing or decreasing? What matters most? And then what should be prioritized? And leadership, so to speak, likes nothing better than having a little list that they can go, good, here's what we're going to do. Here's the next 12 months. I can budget for it. This is the risk. And having the risk so that it's assigned and evaluated based on corporate risk register rather than being IT risk register or legal or something that doesn't have the same language. Or a separate
privacy thing which exists as a sort of orbiting thing around risk. No, they should be folded into existing structures. The last thing you need is another meeting in your calendar, which is the the fortnightly privacy review, forum or whatever. Folded into existing governance. And a
Yes.
risk review should do that. The good thing about privacy is that, I don't know what you think, Rob, the mitigations comparatively pretty easy than some other operational things. We know what you do. There's pretty clear best practice. You know, there's good, as Rob said, there's good maturity guides available online. You can develop and adapt those as you wish. And your goal might not be the top level of maturity. You might be, just solid practice. That's our goal for the next year or whatever. There's pretty good stuff you can do. You just have to be aware of what the risks are.
Yeah. And I think personally that's one of the biggest difficulties. People leave it too long. The longer you leave it, the less mitigations options you have.
Yeah.
The more you're forced down certain ones that you maybe don't like, and they're also more costly.
Yeah.
So, so triggers significant change, and that could include change of risk appetite as well as people go for transformation, migration, etc., mergers, acquisitions. New users of the data, I'd always be not worried, but be thinking about that. And again, going back to the one we were talking about before of reporting, some of the warning signs, complaints, audit findings, incidents, exceptions, looking at the other organisations that are around the place as well and what they've done, as I was saying for Bunnings with facial recognition. Not that there are warning signs, but it might be the sort of thing where we go, oh, hold on a sec, let's just pause for a sec on some of this. Let's see how it fits.
Good
one. Yeah, not being able to sleep at night. Yeah. So leadership needs to understand. So what new privacy exposure has been created? Again, that's where the projects that you're doing hopefully have privacy at least in there somewhere at the beginning for someone to sort of look at how the data is being used. The use of personal information in ways that create additional risk. Now, Darius was talking about GDPR. If you have citizens of the EU as part of your client base, that can change things.
Residents of the EU, Rob.
Sorry, residents. Go on. Yeah. Thanks. Again, though, it's the sort of thing where if you look at it formally, you could probably come along and go, well, actually, Mr. Executives, it's not too much of a risk. We can wear this at the moment. So we don't have to do anything. We can ignore what that vendor's saying. Are they isolated or is it part of the thing? And what's a valid basis for defining this sort of stuff now and ongoing? Again, going back to the standards again and again. It's pretty good for time there, Darius. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, sounds like a last slide. By the way, forgot to say at the beginning, we're going to forward these out to you because it might help, basically, and can't hurt. And there's a recording as well that Gab is going to be sending out. So key takeaways for us from our lessons learned sort of bucket, private incidences are rarely surprises, right? And early action is so much easier. Hopefully you can just get to the point where that's what can be taken. So most of these incidents emerged from risks, were visible, accumulated gradually, were never escalated. But that whole understanding aspect of that is big. And there's a final statement in bold, which I suppose is supposed to summarize everything, Darius?
Yeah.
Yep. So we need visibility and hence the ability to make informed decisions while there are mitigation options and before exposure becomes a breach or before it becomes costly or before it's just one of those things that we suddenly have to literally drop everything and respond to, which is just so painful for any organization, really.
Yeah.
Okay, I will stop sharing at that. And Gab, I'm not sure if have we had any questions pop up or do we have any?
Nothing's in the chat now, but I guess we can open the floor for some Q&A and people to interact if they've got questions. Yeah.
And if anyone has anything too, as part of this, you end up with the email addresses of myself and Darius and where this whole, the way the industry and the environment is quite dynamic, and we don't have a problem with chatting about any of this or some of the specifics that come up, because as I say, a lot of people have already done it and learned bitter lessons.
Yeah, always free to get in touch with us.
Yeah, yep, that's what it's all about. Sharing, caring. That's us, eh?
Always.
Yeah.
Oh, there's something in the chat now from Patrick. Do you want to jump in there, Rob? And
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, this is the case, right? If an organization doesn't have a policy approach to the use of AI, individual going to unit, it's becoming standard in the toolkit of individuals, and so there needs to be a response to it, and it is different from how are we going to use it in a corporate sense? Are we going to acquire an AI platform? You need to know, especially because of the ability to upload anything, upload a document, upload, the spreadsheet to your favorite AI engine and let it go nuts. Now there is definitely, so it has to be addressed because it's going to be part of how individuals function, and they're going to bring that to your agency. That being said, the fundamentals are not new. We've had BYOD, bring your own device, incorporation of that. A lot of people are using their own personal laptops and stuff at work. So yeah, it's definitely one of those risks that should be addressed and people being aware of it, and to provide a really clear advice to employees.
And it's something that really, I think there is enough general broad understanding throughout an organization, from management and individual employees all the way up to executives, to be able to say, hey, there has to be a policy on this. It has to be actionable. It has to be enforceable and literally distributed to all, saying, please be aware, and if there's any problems, do what. But it does at the moment require very active management. As we said, enthusiastic individuals are everywhere, and they're trying to do the right thing as far as they're concerned. Does that help? Not really. But we have one of our favorite clients has just established an AI policy that they got AI to write, which I'm not sure about how that works, but hey, get a draft. But it's something that should be immediately enforceable and immediately have actions based on risk. Again, the risk to privacy, but the risk to general data as well that the organization might have.
Which is the interesting point, Rob, because there's privacy that we talk about, personal information, but then there's also corporate information and what you're willing, there's a sort of another risk, decision made around, okay, corporate information may not necessarily be personal information, but this is what we feel comfortable with exposing to an external AI party or not. Really clear. And as Rob said, enforceable, and enforceable often doesn't mean blanket ban, because people will then go around it.
Yeah, agree. So yeah, Patrick, you're not alone. That's the key message for a lot of that. It's but it is really worthwhile raising it as a specific risk, and actioning it literally immediately, getting together with the people who are going to be actioning it as well to find out what they're capable of doing.
Yeah.
All right. If no one has anything else, Gab, is there anything else we've forgotten, or we're just going to, so we'll send out the slide deck,
No.
recordings.
Yeah. So we'll send out all the information for everyone, and opportunity to connect with you personally after the session today. So yeah, if no one else has got any other questions, you guys can sign off.
All right. Thank you very much. Look
Thanks,
forward
everyone.
to chatting later, guys.
Hope you enjoyed your lunches.
Thanks, everyone.